Welcome back to Fresh Brew. These are simply coffee conversations that we would have if you and I sat down over a cup and talked about preaching. I want to continue talking about how to keep your preaching fresh today, not just your coffee. And one of the ways that we can keep our preaching fresh is to not only study texts, but study people, to study others and to study ourselves. I think a lot of people, when they think about preaching, are so text-centered, they forget about the fact that really preachers are studying life. And part of the reason we use scriptures so heavily is because scriptures so consistently and so faithfully help us understand life as it really is. Life in God, the life of God, the life of the people of God, the life of those who unfortunately don't pursue God. They give us such great examples, these passages do, that we learn so much. There's treasure troves of wisdom, but it's about life itself. So study others and study yourselves as a way of keeping preaching fresh. Let me give you some categories of how you can ask people questions, what you can think about with yourself, reflect on with yourself, even for this next Sunday's sermon, if you're working on a sermon for Sunday, to try to bring fresh insight for people who live real lives as it connects to the text that you're preaching. The first category is importance. When we talk about the self in educational theory, in social construction theory, in social science, in psychology, when we talk about the self, it's a pretty complex concept. A lot goes into what makes you you, and we forget about most of the things that make us ourselves. But one of the things that is true about us is we ascribe importance to particular things. You can call it values, you can call it priorities, you can call it whatever you like, you can call it desires, virtues and vices. But when you think about what's important to yourself, you already start to put things in order, in hierarchy. And when we talk about scriptural passages, as preachers, we know that we're supposed to have a sense of urgency about something. So if you ask us, we'll say, of course it's important. It's critically important. Every passage of scripture I would preach on is important. But how important is it to you compared to other things? When you think about what you're talking about Sunday, when you think about the text that you're talking about, how important is it to you really? If you want to communicate a sense of urgency to others, but you don't have a sense of urgency yourself, you might need to go back to the text and let the text awaken you and your own self to the importance and urgency of the topic. Ask others, how important is this to you? How important is this text in the bigger picture of scriptures? Ask questions centering around priority and values and see what insight that gives you. This is kind of a big word that we use when we study people in psychology or in social study. But efficacy simply means how able do you feel you are to effect change? A sense of self-efficacy is a sense that if you wanted to change something, you could. A low sense of efficacy means you don't feel like you could change it. Maybe you've tried 100 times and you just can't fix it. You've done everything you know how to do. A really low sense of self-efficacy. A high sense of self-efficacy is when you feel like if there was a problem, you could tackle it. Even if you don't know what the problem is, you have confidence that if you give me enough time, I can cover it. And as it relates to a particular topic, a high sense of self-efficacy means that if you were to tackle it, you feel like you'd beat it. You feel like you'd accomplish it. If you were to set a goal, you feel like you would reach it. Think about the topic and then think about yourself. How high of a sense of efficacy do you have related to this topic? If it's low, what's causing it to be low? If it could increase, what might cause it to increase? Ask others similar questions. Have conversations over lunch, or over dinner when you're at their home, or when you're emailing friends of yours, or if you have a preaching group that helps you write sermons, or if you have a preaching partner that you often work with, they're working on a sermon even if they're across the country at the same time as you. What would make this the kind of area in your life that you felt greater confidence with? Or another way to get at that, what are the kinds of small steps people could take that would continue to build increasing efficacy in the same direction instead of asking them to take such a huge leap they won't even try? Next, study your own emotions and study others' emotions. When you read a text, this text, how do you feel? Sometimes I read a passage of scripture, I'll be honest, I'm disgusted. I'm disgusted by the way people behave, or I'm disgusted by what seems to happen to people, and God is not just allowing it, calling for it. Sometimes I'm shocked, other times I'm angry, other times I'm baffled, confused. There are times when I'm inspired, sometimes when I'm deeply grieved, sometimes when I laugh out loud because it just seems like the passage is so full of humor. What are your emotions? What are others' emotions? Their emotions might be different than ours. Empathy doesn't mean we guess at what other people think. Empathy means we've actually gotten into their world, asked good questions, listened, been told what we were wrong, and come out with a treasure trove of relationship after relationship, conversation after conversation, over time, years and years of doing it, a sense of what people actually do experience in ways that are different from our own. Next, what's the motivation? What moves people to do things? Maybe there's a particular thing you're preaching about, and it's really the motivational level you need to get to, or you presume a certain level of motivation on your people in a certain direction, but that's not what motivates them to do it. Maybe they tithe, for example, for very different reasons than you tithe. Or maybe they confess their sins for very different reasons than you would have expected. Or maybe they're showing up at church on Sunday morning for completely different motivations than you've ever had in your life. Or maybe when you look at your own motivations, you start to ask tough questions that are convicting. And as a result, that sermon, that text takes on a powerful, fresh taste for you in your own mouth. What are your motivations? As you're doing this and you're studying, make sure you're including diversity of age, diversity of gender, diversity of ethnicity, culture, socioeconomic status. The more diversity you have as you study others, the more new and fresh insights you'll gain and the better understanding of Scripture you'll have. Also, make sure you're encouraging honesty and modeling honesty for others. Sometimes I just have to share vulnerably with people my own answer to my own question before they'll ever get honest with me. After all, my first name to them is pastor. And if that's the case, often they shut down their honesty level with me unless they're in the private moment of pastoral counseling where they've reached the end of their rope. Shoot for honesty, model honesty. Self-honesty is the most difficult form. Next, give acceptance. When people share with you their motivations, they share with you their deep emotions. When they're honest with you about how they feel about a passage or a topic or a Christian practice and it's negative, we can sometimes move into a fix-it mode, or let me tell you what this passage says mode, or well, tell me if this would help you if I shared this, and we start sharing our sermon and preaching our sermon as if that was a gift to them in a one-on-one moment. Sermons aren't meant to be one-on-one moments. That's not the format. That's not the platform. It's not the time. Instead, what we need to offer to people is acceptance. Acceptance of their thoughts, acceptance of their opinions, acceptance of their feelings. Those don't have to become the orthodox one true way, but we can accept them as human. We can accept that and validate that what they're saying is normal and therefore it's helpful to hear, because if that person's experiencing it, if they're motivated that way, if they're frustrated in that way, or if their emotions are structured in that way, probably others are too. So it's a gift to us when somebody shares with us what they can. Go back through this, look at some of those questions, and ask which category of questions might be most helpful for a sermon that's coming up for you. Send out a few emails, make a few phone calls, ask somebody for coffee. When you step into an environment where you would otherwise read a different scripture, maybe read the scripture that you're studying and ask them questions in a way if they're willing. Then make sure if you're going to share anything that they've shared with you, that you get their permission first. You don't share what they've said with you in private or in one-on-one or one-on-three settings without getting their permission before you bring it into the pulpit. Otherwise, you'll find fewer and fewer of the right kind of people willing to talk to you about it, and more of the wrong kind of people willing to talk to you about your sermon preparation process. So those are some ways to keep your preaching fresh: by studying others, by studying yourself, as well as studying the text. I hope it was helpful for you. I hope it makes preaching even more enjoyable. We'll see you on the next post of Fresh Brew.